The following is an interview with Keith Crane. Keith is an award-winning composer, producer, and multi-instrumentalist, although he primarily plays drums. And he is definitely one of the nicest guys I've met in this business, despite having the kind of success you'd expect to lead to a giant ego. You've heard Keith's compositions on Sex and the City and Will and Grace, and as a producer and performer, his list of credentials is enormous. He's worked with Joe Lynn Turner of Deep Purple, John Anderson from Yes, John Entwistle of The Who, which we'll talk about more later, and of course his drumming gig with 60s pop legends 1910 Fruit Gum Company. In the interview, we're going to be talking about his work on John Entwistle's unfinished songs for a posthumous album that's going to be coming out soon, and just about 5 decades of adventures in this crazy business. We did the interview in his studio in New York, and we also did a studio tour video, which I'll drop on Friday for all of us gearheads out there. Okay, so we are here with Keith Crane, and I am not going to do the introduction. I'm going to let him do his own introduction because it's so long. this guy's got credits for days. But start off with where you started, with the band and the first hit records and all that.
Well, even before that, I started playing at 7 years old, and, obviously back in the 60s, and influenced by everything from the Beatles to the Rascals to, all that. And then fast forward, born and raised a drummer. I like to joke about that, though I play other instruments. And I started touring at, I guess I was around 20. I started getting my first road gig, and I landed up, ironically, starting to play in a number of black show bands and black R&B funk things. But I started doing a lot of that work. And then I landed up at one point, playing with McFadden and Whitehead, if you remember those guys. The song Ain't No Stopping Us Now, the big hit. They also wrote Backstabbing, for the OJs, the Philly guys.
Right.
And I just, I did a gig with them once, and they asked me if I would continue playing with them, and I started touring with them. And that was a very fun gig, But I've done a lot of everything from, as a session drummer, I started out, I lived in Boston for a while. When I came back from Boston, I started, touring, and then doing a lot of session work and, jingle work and record dates. I did one of those records over there is actually a Broadway show. I did the soundtrack, and, I just started developing reputation and getting my ass kicked a few times, in the business, and humbling. And that's one thing I tell people all the time: stay humble, and I've been very blessed. So then, I through the 80s, I started, doing a lot of work with, McFadden and Whitehead. I was playing with them and doing lots of club stuff, and then it got to the point where it started getting serious. I started falling more into production. What I would do is, as a player, in the studio, I would ask the producers, after I was done doing my tracking, if I had time, and if they were cool enough, that I would ask them, do you mind if I become a fly on the wall and hang out,
right,
and watch.
As a drummer, you generally would have gone first, I would imagine, and so you have a lot of time to watch the rest of the process.
Yeah, we'd go in doing rhythm tracks. I also did quite a bit of, back in the day, I was, the ghost anonymous drummer, rhythm section player for Sugar Hill Gang, if you remember those guys.
I recognize the name.
They did the Rapper's Delight.
Right.
Hotel, Motel.
Yes.
Well, I'm not on that, because that's actually Chic, a backing track that they lifted of Good Times from Chic.
Right.
But what we would do is we'd be asked, and the studio was located in Englewood, New Jersey, and basically you'd go in anonymously. I was a young kid, so I was loving it. You go in, they put a click track on, and you play for 20 minutes. And the bass player and the guitar, and you just groove on stuff.
Right.
And
early days of loops.
Yeah, and that's what they would do.
Yeah.
They would take 4-bar loops. A lot of bands did it, more than you think. A friend of mine was in Blue Oyster Cult, and he says, we would do that. And, in Blue Oyster Cult, they would take a loop that would work really well for a section. And I mean, not for the entire song, but if something felt really good for those 8 bars of a verse, they would use that. Albert Bouchard was a really good drummer, so they didn't have to, it wasn't because he wasn't a good player.
Right.
So that's what we would do. We'd go in as a rhythm section, and we would just play, goof, da, and play that forever. And then they would cut it up, like I said. So I did that, but I would always stay. Like you said, the drums, the rhythm section was usually always the first to go down. Nowadays, a lot of times it's later on. You then do the Def Leppard thing. Rick Allen would do his drums last because they would all cut to a drum machine.
Right.
But yes, so I would get a chance to sit and be a fly on the wall.
Right.
And
was there a producer or somebody that really showed you the most that you felt like you learned a great deal from?
Producer, composer who's now, he's like my second dad. His name is Steve Carmen. He actually got me sort of going in a sort of indirect way into the jingle world as a jingle writer, which led me to the scoring thing. He's a very dear friend. He's a legendary jingle writer.
Right.
And he, for those out there who are a little older, you will probably remember, I Love New York. All of the famous Budweiser. When you say Budweiser, you've said it all. Weekends Were Made for Michelob.
Wow.
Just dozens and dozens and dozens of hit jingles, and we met just through circumstance of me, being fearless. And I use this word all the time. We talked about it before. I tell everybody to be fearless. One day I was dared to write a jingle for a company in Boston, and I didn't know anything about it, but I said yes.
Right.
Okay, I could write a jingle.
Sure.
So, and meanwhile, I didn't know anything, but I said yes. Yeah, I always tell people, just say yes.
Yeah.
So that project never came to fruition, but I had this little demo reel on cassette.
Right.
That I made up spots for Fresca and Flower Company and all this different stuff. And I figured, well, I already did this work, and I had a very modest studio setup back in the day. And I said, well, let me see if I can try to get a gig as a jingle writer, maybe at a big jingle house in the city, not realizing how impossible that was. Everybody wanted to do it.
Right.
Because it was a lot of money to be made. So I'm starting to cold call Yellow Pages before the internet, cold call Yellow Pages, Westchester Yellow Pages, like second phone call. And it's just meant to be.
Right.
This guy picks up the phone, and what I find out after the fact is he never picked up his own phone. His assistant would always pick it up. He's a one-man shop, and there's this guy, Steve Carmen. I knew nothing about who he was, and I was just some kid trying to get into the business. And he was really sweet, and he was just sort of on the tail end of his career at that point, mid to late 80s. He was ready to start, retiring. And we became fast friends. And he was the guy that would bring me into the studio. I was experienced in the studio as a player, but not as a producer yet.
Right.
And he invited me to some of his sessions. And they were big sessions. They were, Frank Sinatra's string section.
Right.
It was Will Lee on bass. It could have been Steve Jordan on drums. It could have been Steve Gadd on drums. It was the who. Because he had the budgets to bring in the best of the best.
Right.
And so he would allow me to come in, and he would just say, like I say to people now, come in, be a fly on the wall, learn, listen, and watch what's going on. And I would just be for 12 hours, just sit on the couch and not say a word, just watch. Right. And listen and see, and the art of not just becoming, because I have a lot of young producers now, they just call themselves producers, but it's not the same as it was. And I am kind of sounding old. Producing is more than just, sitting there dialing sounds up and pulling a mic up and doing that. It's how to work with an artist.
Yeah.
How to make people feel comfortable. I've learned that the hard way. And as a being on the other side of the glass as a drummer, as a musician, I saw how I was treated. I was in sessions where it was brutal.
Right.
They were terrible. It was really making you feel very tough. And then there were sessions where they were so cool. And that's what I would take from that. I would say, how do I make, because really at the end of the day, you're getting the best performance out of a person by making them feel the most comfortable.
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever it takes. If I'm got a girl singer in there and I know she's, we're doing a really nice plot, I'll put flowers next to her in the tracking room, or I'll dim the lights, or whatever it takes to make them feel as comfortable.
Yeah, and that's why you get some of the best studios in these remote locations, because you want people to go out and forget about life.
Exactly.
Think about the music.
And that fast forwards to where I met Neil Dorfman.
Right.
Legendary engineer producer. The only producer I ever met and worked with that doesn't play an instrument.
Okay.
He's one of those rare breeds. I mean, plenty of engineers out there don't play instruments, but he's a producer, and he has got elephant ears, and he's the sweetest guy in the world. And we could when we talk about the Entwistle thing, Neil is going to be involved in that, and he lives up and that's how I met him. I met him in one of these remote studios in Suffern, New York. For those who remember Spyro Gyra, the band Spyro Gyra, which was like a jazz pop band, Jay Beckenstein's place. He built and had lived in Suffern, and built this world-class recording studio called Bear Tracks. Now, it was originally built for him and the band, but it turned out to be this incredible residential setup, an old barn, beautiful barn that, made into a world-class recording studio, and it became the place. Phil Ramone would go there, like when Julian Lennon did his first record, Vlad.
Yeah.
That was recorded at Bear Tracks.
Yeah.
And early Dream Theater, Bear Tracks.
Right. Yep.
In fact, if you look on YouTube and you look at Mike Portnoy, you can see him driving down the road. I think you and I spoke about this. And you see him walking in, and that's how I met Neil. And we were co-producing a project together, and I had never met him before. And I was brought in by the client, and he was you would never know, because he was so cool and so unassuming, how heavy he was. Right. And you talk about resumes, my God, and he was so, and I was still learning my chops. This was in the 80s, and he made me feel so comfortable. And and I wasn't a performer, but I was working with him. And as far as he was concerned, we were on equal ground.
That's amazing.
And this is a guy, for those who don't know, you can Google him. He did and won the Grammy for Brothers in Arms, the Dire Straits record, Money for Nothing, and then also Sting's Nothing Like the Sun record, Englishman.
You worked with Sting too, right? Or was it
I worked at his house in his studio. We didn't work directly. I mean, he was there, but we worked in the studio. We were kind of programming sounds,
right.
But I know that whole camp. Yeah. In fact, I have one of Sting's keyboards inside, because he doesn't ever. I mean, they just kind of. I know Danny Quattrochi not very well, but we used to be closer. He's Sting's tech, has been since day one.
Right.
When they were still driving around in a van.
Right.
And playing in front of 15 people at the Chance Theater, in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
And so Danny and the crew is still with them. The same crew.
Right.
For, God, probably getting close to 50 years.
Right.
And
so tell me about just a quick rundown of the resume of people you've produced, projects you've done.
Projects I've done. I've worked with Jolyn Turner as a drummer.
Right.
As a producer, I've done things for Buck Dharma as a drummer, Tommy Zvonchek, who was also in the Boys to Cole. So as a drummer, I did record dates with them, guys from Charlie Daniels Band. But as a producer, I've worked with John Anderson. I kind of co-produced and played on a single that I did with him before he went in with the Band Geeks.
Right.
You know, and this happens to be the keyboard player for the Band Geeks keyboard.
Right.
Chris Clark, who's a friend of mine. Mostly in the world of film, you know, and TV commercials. I've produced and composed commercials for French fries. The one that put me on the map as a composer and producer was Partnership for Drug-Free America campaign that I did in the early 90s, and that kind of set me off.
Right.
Because it was very tough to get into the commercial world. And somebody gave me an opportunity, an ad agency gave me an opportunity to do this. And you don't know how long these campaigns are going to run for.
Right.
And this happened to have become very successful, and it was four commercials in the package, and it ran for like 8-9 years. You know, and it was
you're getting royalties on it while it runs. Basically.
As long as it runs, you get royalties.
Sex and the City.
Well, then I landed up. Thank you. Yeah. Then I landed up getting through my agent a call that, you know, they were looking for a new composer for season 6, and which was the final season, which was what a lot of people say was the best season because they were wrapping up the storyline.
Right.
And so I got called because they saw my reel. Dan Lieberstein, this music supervisor, heard my stuff and saw my stuff and hired me, you know, brought me in as one, because that was an interesting show because they had a handful of composers for different styles of music. Now, I can write in a lot of different styles, but they wanted somebody that did the house stuff, the techno stuff, when the girls would go to a dance club or something like that. And then they'd have the rock guy. But I was the guy that was closest to the original music of the show, which was Douglas Cuomo, who did the original theme. And my stuff just happened to have that sensibility, you know, and they heard it, and it was kind of jazzy, poppy, very quirky. My stuff could be very quirky, very left of center, and you know, mixing, you know, spaghetti western guitars with European, you know, romantic, you know, violins, and I just love that thing. I love doing that because that's what sets me apart from other composers. Right. So I was one of the composers on that show, and that was a fantastic experience. And it was fun because the guy I was working for was an old hippie. Right. Dan Lieberstein he was a former drummer, an old hippie, and he just got it. But it was so funny. I tell stories about this. In fact, when my friend Steve Carman was writing a book about the, you know, TV and commercial industry, he goes, "I need a cool quote from you from my book." And he goes, what kind of descriptors did you get from him as far as what they wanted from you as a composer? And Dan Lieberstein came, you know, one of my first conversations with him, he said, you know, "Keith, I need a hip groove with a smile in it." Yeah. And Steve wrote it in his book. And I go, well, that's interesting. I had to kind of interpret that. I'm like, well, what is he talking about? It's like when somebody says, can you make that a little bit more blue? Right. A little more red. Yeah. You know? So, you know, you have to learn how to interpret what these people want. Yeah. You know, and hopefully hit the mark. And fortunately, I was.
It's cool when people can pull stuff out of you that you wouldn't have thought of, too. I love that. I had worked with a producer, this is going back into the late 80s, early 90s, and I was doing a lead guitar track. And at the time, you know, it's all hair metal, and it wasn't a hair metal song, but I had those chops. Right. And I was playing stuff on it, and it wasn't quite what he was looking for. And finally, he stops me, and he tells me the story. He's like, there's a girl walking in the woods, blah, blah. He goes through this whole story, and like how she gets bit by a snake, and she's dying, and she's blah, blah, blah. And I'm like really captured in the story. And he just stops and goes, go. He wanted to get me in a mood. Yeah. And I don't know what I played, how I played it. It came out great. Like I heard it back, and I'm like, I have to transcribe my own music. I have no idea what I did.
And that's coming full circle. That's what makes a really good producer. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about before, about making somebody get out of their comfort zone too.
Yeah.
And not even realize you're getting out of your comfort zone.
Without feeling uncomfortable about
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Like he knew you can do it.
Yeah.
And that was good because he had faith in you.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been, I mean, I've been in scenarios where I have been producing a session and names will be withheld, but I remember having a horn section in to do live horns because I love doing live instruments. I mean, I'm a idiot, as we all are, you know, like, and I do a lot of that, but it's usually a means to an end to replace a lot of the tracks with live players.
Right.
And, you know, fortunately, I'll have clients that will allow me to do that and give me the budget for it most of the time. And I remember having a horn section in here that my client was insisting on using. It was actually a record date, and I was producing it, and they wanted these guys. And I said, okay, I'm going to send you guys, I had charts, I'm going to send you the chart, and I'm going to also, because I wrote the arrangement, and I'm going to give you the mock-up sampled horns.
Right.
Here's the part. It's kind of a no-brainer. They don't have to improvise. Here's the parts. And they came in, and I find out that one of them couldn't read, which was shocking to me. A horn player that couldn't read.
Yeah.
You know, a sax player, how can you not read? So, and then the other, they never listened to the track.
Wow.
They never looked at the chart. They never called me to let me know or called the client to let them know. They come in, and within a half hour, I realize this is going nowhere fast.
Right.
And I called the session. I ended the session. I said to my client, first of all, you know, as a producer, you also have to watch out for your client's budget.
Yeah.
That's big part of it. You have to, you know, I always call it working smart. You're not there to hurt people's feelings.
Right,
I've worked with producers who are ruthless.
Right.
You know, and sometimes I get it. If you're wasting time there, you're in the wrong place.
Right.
You know, you shouldn't be here. You're out of your element. But I don't believe in being that person.
Right.
So sometimes you have to call. So getting back to your story, you know, he knew you had what it took.
Right.
And it's just a matter of telling him a story, a little Red Riding Hood story.
Somewhere else. Yep.
You put yourself, you know, and I was doing that the other day. I was working with this girl singer, and you know, she was wonderful because she loved the input. You know, and you have to be that open. Yeah. You know,
you have to feel out the person.
You have to feel out I have this invisible sign that basically is check your ego at the door.
Yep.
And I've worked with some monster talent, you know, and big time people. And what I find is most of these people, when whether I'm playing with them or working with them in the studio, most of them really don't have the ego that you think they're going to have because they've been there, done that.
Right.
They've already done. They don't have to, you know. Like when I'm touring, we're on stage, you know, and we're playing and we're backstage with Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits,
right?
You know, or some, you know, or Tommy James from Tommy James and Shonda. These guys are the coolest, most you know, like Neil Dorsman,
right?
They got nothing to prove, and they've been there, done that. And all they want to do is entertain the people or make a record or do whatever.
Right.
And it's sort of, we've all dealt with the wannabes of the world. And all I could say to everybody, because I've been doing this my whole life. I'm proud to say I've never had a day job.
Yeah.
And you got to be humble. You got to, you know, you got to be blessed that, you know, we get to do this for a living.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gold records. We can't skip that. That's the big thing.
So I landed up becoming in a band, and now I'm not the original. I replaced the original drummer. I am in a 60s band, a notable 60s band, and it's a funny name. The band is 1910 Fruit Gum Company. And we are the quote unquote, the kings of bubblegum rock of the late 60s. Right. Band kind of launched in 67. The first hit came out in 67, first 68. For those that are 60s fanatics. So the first gold record was a song called Simon Says. And that was followed. Came out in '68, and then that was followed up with a song called "123 Red Light." That was the second gold record, and then the third gold record, which was actually actually "123 Red Light" was also notable. The third gold record was "Indian Giver." Interesting thing about the band and the songs was they became very inspirational to the '70s punk, '80s new wave movement.
Right.
Unbeknownst to the band, the Ramones, I joke about it when we talk to people. Punk is basically pop music on steroids.
Yeah.
And so the Ramones were the first band to cover Indian Giver.
Okay.
For those out there, you should go and check out the song. You can check out our version, which is the original version. And ironically, that song is would be considered now politically incorrect.
Yeah, very much so.
So, because the band was ready to dump the song.
Right.
I mean, and it's a hard thing to do because it's one of their gold records.
Right.
So it's just ironic. But anyway, so that song became very iconic with the Ramones. Joan Jett covered it. And we actually have a connection with Joan Jett. I'm going to be seeing her keyboard player manager next week at a session we're doing. Kenny Laguna, Kenny's been Joan's keyboard player, manager, producer since the late '70s after she left the Runaways. And he happened to have been the original keyboard player on Indian Giver.
Right.
And he also played with Tommy James and the Shondells. And anyway, so that's that connection. And that's how Joan landed up covering our song.
And what year did you join the band?
I joined the band when the band reunited in 2000. I joined in... I've been there for about 15 years now.
Okay. And you guys were playing like decent size.
We play large venues.
Yeah.
We play. I just reposted. We play PNC Art Center. We've played anywhere from 1,200 seat theaters to outdoor festivals.
Right.
Like we go out every few years out to Cool Deadwood Nights out in Deadwood, South Dakota,
right.
where the TV show was filmed.
Right.
And where
do you get at the shows? Is it almost all people that would have heard the original music?
A lot of baby boomers,
right?
But there's a lot of younger kids, not kids, but younger audiences that are coming out that are getting hip to the '60s music again.
Right.
The people who like my daughter loves the Beatles, and my daughter had come out on tour with me with the band, and she loves that stuff, and she talks to her friends, and a lot of them know who these bands are, and who a lot of times they may not know the name, but they'll know the songs.
Right.
The demographic is pretty wide.
So now does your to lead to the next topic, does your involvement with this band, is that what makes the connection to the Who and the Entwistle project?
No, it had nothing to do with it.
So how does that come about? And tell us about that project.
Okay, so just so you know, I am the drummer and musical director in the 1910 Fruitcomb Company, and the producer of the new record, because we are doing a new record.
Right.
What got the John Entwistle connection was I was working with, I have to be careful about mentioning certain names because there was a fallout. But I was working with somebody that was close to the John Entwistle camp. Mm-hmm. Now, John has passed away back in '02. Right. Sadly, the day before the Who was about to launch their tour. And I acquired, through working with this person, we were supposed to be doing a new Entwistle record of all new material, not remixes, not live stuff, not alternate take stuff. This was all unheard John Entwistle music that nobody's ever heard, that were sitting in the archives. And I started working with this person as a co-composer, because most of it was unfinished stuff. Like when you were here last time, I played you the John Entwistle track and then what I did with it.
Right.
And some of it was just bass. John was also a very prolific keyboard player.
Right.
And so some of it was keyboards. So anyway, I started working with this person. on this material. And unfortunately, the relationship went south. However, I did all of this work on it, and it just turned out that I really did all the work, and this guy was going to take all the credit.
Right.
So again, I can't go down that rabbit hole, but the bottom line is my lawyer, who's a good friend of mine, basically said to me, we should license that since you've done all this work. We should go to the estate and license it and talk to the estate and get Christopher, his only living heir, his son, John's son, permission to finish this and release it. And so that's exactly what we did. My lawyer contacted the estate in London, and they were thrilled to have me on board. And, we sent them the original demos of what John was doing. And with the original, some of the titles were just, John Noodling,
Right.
or some funny names that he would make up. And from that point on, once we got paper, little legal paper that gave me permission, licensing permission to finish this material, I hit the ground running.
So how many songs are you looking at?
Well, I have 13 pieces of music.
Right.
Some of it is, like I said, him just kind of noodling to a drum machine.
Right.
Some of it was more completed. I have this.
So some of it's just more like an inspiration that leads to a song.
Right. And what I'm doing is some of it is much more completed. Now, for the Who fans out there who might know John's catalog, John was always allowed. It was almost like Ringo and George Harrison. They were allowed one or two songs per record.
Right.
Whereas Pete Townsend was the primary writer.
Right.
So on of course Boris the Spider, everybody knows, and My Wife, and John had some very big songs over the course of the Who. On the Who Are You record, which was the last record before Keith died, John had a song called 905. For those of you who were fans, you can check it out. It's a great song. And John was very into science fiction.
Right.
And so 905 was basically the opening lyric. I'm paraphrasing, something like, my mother was a test tube and my father was an incubator.
Yeah.
And it was like crazy. He had a very dark but funny sense of humor.
Yeah.
And so when I'm working on this stuff, I have to almost, feel him channeling.
Yeah.
Because I would never write lyrics this way.
Right.
But I am, because of what I'm doing. So he had this song 905, which was a space, science fiction kind of thing. He was very into, like, remember, Logan's Run was a 70s movie, that was like in that genre of...
Yeah, I remember that.
Science fiction. And he was really into that. So he wrote the song 905 based on that inspiration, but he wanted to do a whole concept record.
Right. This is not going to be a concept record.
No.
It just has pieces from that thought.
Well, he has that one song, and I landed up, now he had started writing the overture called 905 Overture that Pete Townsend didn't want to do.
Right.
Didn't like it. So guess who landed up with it? Me.
Right.
I landed up with it. And it's all synth kind of stuff. I heard where he was going. I think I played it for you last time. And I knew that and John was a symphonic musician. He was actually, his instrument was French horn trumpet.
Right.
And if he wasn't in the Who, he probably would have been in a symphonic orchestra in England. Right. And he was the John Paul Jones of the Who. He was the trained musician.
Right.
And, John Paul Jones and Zeppelin, he was the guy that did all the arranging, all the string parts, all the synth stuff. Genius. Brilliant bass players and brilliant musicians. Right. So, like, if anybody, and I didn't know this, but all that horn stuff in Tommy and in Who's Next, that's all, it's not session horn players, that's John playing.
Oh, wow, okay.
You know, yeah, that's all John playing French horn.
Is he
trumpet.
credited on the record for that?
He might be.
Yeah.
We have to look.
Yeah.
We have to look. But he played anytime you heard horn parts in any Who songs, that was John.
Right.
And so he had this track, 905 Overture, that was basically synth based. But I heard through all of the synth parts, I knew where he was going with it, and I don't know if he was ever thought about doing it as a full live orchestra, but I did as soon as I heard it.
Right.
So what I'm doing now with that, and that's going to be released, and that's actually going to be licensed. The wonderful thing about the deal I have with the estate is that I can do whatever I want with it.
Right.
All they want is writing credit. They want, which will go to Christopher. So they want half writers,
Right.
and half publishing.
How far are you along in the process? Is this something that's going to come out?
I'm going to be dropping these as singles.
Okay.
So the first, not that particular piece, which is an instrumental, I have this one track, which I think you heard, which I almost had Lou Gramm from Foreigner singing on.
This is the one with the bass and the delay?
No, that was something different.
Okay.
This is a song it's more of a pop rock thing. It's called I Know What You're Thinking.
Right.
And so I completed it, and right now we're almost ready. In fact, I just reached out to the estate. I want to get Christopher to get me some, because John was an amazing artist also.
Right.
In fact, if you look on the album Who by Numbers,
Right.
all those caricature kind of thing, that's John.
Okay.
So he's a wonderful, quirky artist. So I'm going to try to get some original artwork
That's cool.
for the first single, and some possible pictures.
You mentioned about trying to get Lou Gramm. Have there been any names we know on any of the tracks, or is it planned?
Not yet, but what we're shooting for is Lou Gramm was about to do it, but he, unfortunately, the timing of it was he just is about to drop his new solo record.
Right.
Lou Gramm from Foreigner. And so disappointing, but I get it. So he said to me, through his son, who's his manager, Matthew, Lou, just listened to it, and unfortunately he feels like it's going to be kind of a conflict because he's ready to drop his solo, and I totally understand that.
Right.
It's just not the right timing. The next person we're trying to get, and I have an in, I just found out, trying to get Sammy Hagar. Sammy, if you're watching this, I got a track for you, and John would be thrilled to have you on it. It's definitely a Sammy Hagar kind of vibe.
I heard that one. I agreed with you. You could hear his voice all over.
You know, so right now I have my keyboard player did a great job singing it, but he's basically just doing the demo for me so I can send it out.
Right.
So that song is probably going to be the first to be dropped. Now this song is probably going to have, are you a Vanilla Fudge fan? Do you remember the
I know
Vanilla?
them, but I haven't listened to it since.
The guitar player Vince Martel is probably going to be playing on this track, but we have I have one interesting track, which the working title is Rock the Moon, which happens to have Keith Moon on drums.
Yeah.
So I think I might have played that for you last time. So it's basically John, it's the Who rhythm section, which I happen to have rights to. And so to answer your question, it looks like I'm getting Joe Walsh. Thank you. I have Joe Walsh because Joe Walsh's drummer, Joe Vitale, is a friend of mine. Right. And when I first got these tracks, I realized that Joe Walsh and Joe Vitale they were friends with Entwistle, and they did Too Late the Hero solo record in 1981. Right. And they were on that record. So I reached out to Joe Vitale. I said, I got this situation. I explained the situation. You think you and JW would be interested in playing on this? And I sent him some tracks, and he goes, absolutely. So unfortunately, Joe Walsh is so busy. It's like the Eagles are not ever, for a band that hates each other, they have touring that never ends.
Right.
They're on tour constantly. So I got to track down, but Joe's interested. Right. He wants to do it. So he's probably going to play on the track, and he might collaborate with me as writing. He might want to co-write with me on this Rock the Moon track. Right. That has Keith Moon on it. Right. And so because Vitaly said that's the track Joe's going to probably want to play on.
Okay.
And right, so yes, we have some notable. We have Joe Walsh, Joe Vitaly's going to be. Even though I'm a drummer, I am open. I don't need to be playing on all this stuff.
Right.
You know, so I got Joe Vitaly on board to do one of these other tracks that is aptly right now. Working title is Elephant in the Room.
Right.
That I think he's going to be awesome on. And I'm reaching out to although it's been very weird, trying to get Zach Starkey, was just fired from the Who.
Right.
You know, you heard that whole weird, I don't know why they would, he's the best drummer since Keith Moon.
Right.
You know, so there's a number of people that we're working on I already have a word out to one of my favorite guitar players who was very close with John, Peter Frampton.
Right.
So I'm going to try to get Peter on this. Rick Wakeman.
Right.
I'm working on getting from Yes, keyboard player, who was very close with John. So it's just a matter of having my camp kind of get in touch with their camp, and I don't have any reason to believe that they're not going to do. Right. At this point of their lives, it's about the legacy.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Not about the money. Nobody's been asking me for money. I mean, what we'll probably end up doing is giving back end.
Right.
On the project. You know, if Joe Walsh is going to be a co-writer, it'll come out of my half.
Right.
You know, and just to get down into the particulars of how the mechanics of this thing work.
Right.
They're basically doing it because we're honoring John's legacy.
So do you have the 13 tracks dropped as singles? Do you have a schedule, like you want to have them a certain number of months apart or something?
I'd like to have the first one drop. If I can get Vince Martell on it, I'm working on trying to get him on it in the next month. Like the song is done. It's ready to go. I just want to get some people on it. Right now, I mean, technically I can release it as it is,
right,
but I got to get the right singer.
Right.
And I got to get the right guitar player.
Right.
Now, I'm playing a lot of the guitars on it right now, which sound fine, but it needs more. And, you know, I believe I'm willing to wait for the schedule, the right schedule. Right. But I'm hoping to release, I know what you're thinking. I'd like to have it early summer, which is coming up, maybe July.
Yeah.
I'd like to have it dropping in July. Now, you know, coming full circle about the Entwistle thing, Neil, to tie Neil Dorsman into this.
Right.
Neil, I reconnected with Neil when I first got this stuff, and I reached out to him, and he's living up in Woodstock now. And I said, you know, and I know what these guys get. I said, Neil, I'd like you to be involved in this, you know, not only me be co-producing some of this stuff with me, but as an engineer. And, you know, I mean, he's engineered everything from Pat Benatar to obviously the stuff I mentioned earlier, but to Def Leppard and, you know, I mean, he's Paul McCartney. And so he's a huge Who fan, and he never worked with him. And I sent him some stuff, and I have this one track 905, which I want to do a full orchestra with. Right. So I would use Neil as my engineer.
Right.
You know, because he's totally, I learned a lot about being in session with him, about how he mics things. You know, he puts his ear right up to the instrument and finds the sweet spot, you know, and he's such a sweet guy. And he says, Keith, I'm in. So we're going to be working on that together. So I'd like him to, once I get this tracked, and he's got some people in mind about who could be playing on it. Earl Slick is one person who was with David Bowie.
Yeah, but I remember.
But Earl Slick has played with everybody.
Yeah.
And he was most notable with David Bowie. I'm trying to remember who else he played with. But he's like a who's who. And he lives up in this area.
Right.
And Neil mentioned that Earl would probably won't be interested in it. So having Neil involved, you know, I can land up, you know, he's my...
Yeah, that'll lead you to other people.
Lead to other people. So, you know, it's one of these things that this thing has like octopus tentacles. Yeah. It's just far reaching. Anybody that I may not know, you know, I have a whole who's who of list. You know, Sting might be involved in it, you know, because Sting was hugely influenced, although he doesn't play like him, hugely influenced by Entwistle.
Right.
I mean, there's not a bass player out there that hasn't been. Geddy Lee.
Right.
You know, I wish I could find a lead to Geddy Lee, because I'm sure he would want to do something on this.
Sure.
But it's just a matter of getting into the camps.
Yeah.
You know, I know the people would do it. It's just a matter of getting to them.
Well, look, we all look forward to hearing it. Any samples you share with me?
Yeah, I'll send you some rough stuff. Yeah, you know, I mean, fortunately, I'm being the owner, and you know, I have to keep things kind of close to my vest on some level.
Right.
But it's going to be a big release. Right. But I will definitely share some stuff with you.
All right. Well, look, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Oh, thank you.
Doing this and giving us all the cool stories.
It's my pleasure, and I love sharing these wonderful stories. And like I said, I'm blessed that I get a chance to do this amazing stuff.
Yeah.
With these amazing artists, and you know, I'm a fan. Not only am I doing this stuff as a producer and composer, I'm a fan of this stuff.
Yeah, that's what makes it great.
That's what makes it great, you know?
All right, thanks, buddy.